It started on a cold Tuesday night when I came back from work later than usual, and as I walked down the dimly lit street towards my small apartment, I noticed something strange. There was a man standing perfectly still at the corner across from my building. He was not moving, not smoking, not looking at a phone, just standing as if waiting for something or someone. I thought little of it. At first, maybe he was waiting for a taxi. Maybe he was lost. But the odd thing was the way he kept facing directly towards my building, as if he had been standing there long before I turned the corner. I unlocked my door, went upstairs, and tried to shake off the uneasy feeling. The next night I came home at nearly the same time, and there he was again in the exact same spot, wearing the same dark coat, hands deep in his pockets and his head tilted slightly down. He was not tall, not short, just average looking, but something about the stillness of his posture made my stomach tighten. I glanced quickly and hurried inside, convincing myself it was coincidence. Maybe the neighborhood had a night walker. Maybe he was just a harmless neighbor who enjoyed standing outside at night. But then the third night arrived, and I felt my pulse quicken before I even turned the corner, because a part of me already knew he would be there. And of course he was standing like a statue, his face half hidden in the shadows. Yet I could sense his eyes following me. I tried to slow down to act casual, but my legs betrayed me. Quickening towards the door, I could feel his presence drilling into my back as I fumbled with the keys. At this point, my rational mind began to argue against my fear. Maybe he lived nearby, maybe he had his own reasons. But another part of me whispered that no normal person would stand in the exact same place every night at the exact same hour. Doing absolutely nothing, I started to dread the evenings when I had to pass by him, my chest tightening each time. One evening, I forced myself to be brave. I stopped a few feet from him and asked, "Are you waiting for someone?" My voice shook more than I wanted it to. He slowly raised his head, but he did not answer. He just smiled faintly, as if my words were nothing but background noise. That smile chilled me more than any angry shout would have. I turned quickly and went inside, heart hammering against my ribs. After that, I decided to test him. I changed my schedule, left work earlier than later. Sometimes I took a different route, but somehow, whenever I came home around 11, he was there, as if bound to that hour and that spot. I told myself I was imagining things. Maybe it was not every night, maybe I only noticed when it happened, but deep down I knew it was consistent. A week passed and curiosity gnawed at me. I asked my neighbor if he knew the man, described his coat, his posture. My neighbor frowned and said, "What man? I come back from the pub most nights. Around that time I have never seen anyone out there." I felt the blood drain from my face, because how could I be the only one seeing him unless the timing was so exact that no one else noticed? The nights grew heavier, the silence outside more suffocating. Sometimes I peeked through the blinds before going to bed, and I would see him still there, unmoving, head tilted as if listening to the heartbeat of the building. I could not understand why he was there, what he wanted, why he never moved except to occasionally shift his weight from one leg to another. One particularly stormy night, I convinced myself he would not show up, who would stand in the pouring rain at midnight. But when I stepped out of the taxi, my breath caught in my throat, because there he was, soaked from head to toe, coat plastered to his body, face dripping with rain, yet still smiling that faint, unsettling smile. It was then I realized he was not waiting for a taxi, not waiting for anyone. He was there for the house and everyone in it. I tried to ignore him, but my sleep became fractured nightmares of someone standing silently at the foot of my bed, my alarm clock showing 11:00 glowing red in the darkness. I woke sweating every night, afraid to look towards the window, fearing I might see him standing right outside on the balcony. Finally, one evening, I gathered enough courage to confront him directly. I stepped up, close, heart pounding, and said, "Who are you? Why are you here? What do you want?" He looked at me for a long moment, his eyes calm, almost kind. And finally, in a soft, low voice, he said, "I am here to watch." Then he turned his gaze back to the building as if I had ceased to exist. My skin crawled at the simplicity of his words. I stumbled back inside, locking the door again and again. The next day I reported it to the landlord and even the police, but when they came by, of course he was gone. They looked at me like I was overworked, stressed, imagining things. They told me no crime had been committed. A man standing on a public street was no violation, and there was nothing they could do. But I knew he would return, and he did every night at the same time like clockwork. Sometimes he would wave faintly when I walked by, not friendly, more like acknowledging my awareness. Sometimes he would just stand completely motionless for hours, and sometimes I would see him whispering words I could not hear to the dark windows of the building. Weeks turned into months, and the fear settled deep inside me like a sickness. I stopped inviting friends over. I stopped staying out late. I even considered moving. But every time I thought about leaving, I imagined turning another corner in another city and finding him there again, waiting patiently at 11 sharp, and the thought paralyzed me. One night I forced myself to stay at the window watching from 10:30 onward. The street empty, silent, until the clock on my phone flicked to 11:00, and then my heart stopped, because in that exact moment he stepped out from behind a lamppost, as if appearing from the shadows himself. Not walking down the street, not approaching from afar, but simply emerging at the precise minute he was supposed to be there. That was the night I realized he was not just a man passing through, not just a stranger with strange habits. He was tied to that moment in time, tied to that place, and for reasons I still cannot explain, tied to me and my home. I pulled the curtains shut and never dared to look again. But even now, every night at 11, I feel it. The weight of eyes from the street below pressing against the walls, reminding me that he is there, and he will always be there watching. It was early autumn when the apartment across the hall finally found a new tenant. The place had been empty for months, and I had grown used to the silence of that locked door one afternoon. As I returned from work, I saw a man in his 50s carrying boxes up the stairs. He was lean, his hair gray and combed neatly. He nodded politely as he struggled with the weight, and I offered a quick hello. He smiled faintly, but did not say much later. That evening I heard the muffled sounds of furniture being moved, then silence again. By the next day, the hallway smelled faintly of cigarette smoke and old wood, the scent of someone settling into a long stay. At first there was nothing unusual about him. He left early in the mornings, came back late in the evenings, but what caught my attention was the small figure I glimpsed behind him. Once a girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with pale hair and a dress that seemed too light for the cool weather. She peeked out from behind his arm as he unlocked the door, her eyes wide and unblinking. I smiled and raised a hand in greeting, but she quickly slipped inside and the door closed. I thought little of it at first, just a shy child adjusting to a new place. But days passed and I never saw her again. The man would leave carrying groceries or return with bags, but the girl never appeared outside. Not even in the courtyard where the children of the building usually played. The curtains of the apartment remained drawn tightly across the windows, as though the light itself was unwelcome occasionally. At night, I thought I heard the faint sound of a child humming a soft, broken tune seeping through the walls, though it was impossible to tell if it came from his apartment or simply my imagination. Curiosity gnawed at me. I mentioned the new neighbor casually to the building caretaker, asked if he knew anything about the man and his daughter. The caretaker gave me a puzzled look and said he moved in alone. No children, no family, just him. I laughed nervously, insisting I had seen a girl. He shook his head and said, "No, you must be mistaken. He signed the lease himself. He lives alone." I felt a chill spread through me, remembering the wide eyes of the little girl hiding behind his arm. One evening, returning late, I stopped as I reached my door. The light above the hallway flickered, and I noticed movement across the hall. The curtain shifted slightly. A thin hand pressed against the glass for only a moment, then vanished. I stood frozen, staring until the curtain fell still. I wanted to knock to ask questions, but fear held me back. Nights grew heavier with strange details. Sometimes faint scratching noises echoed from his apartment, as if something dragged across the floor. Sometimes I heard muffled voices too low to make out, though. I was sure only one person lived there other times. I awoke suddenly at 3 in the morning, certain I had heard a knock on my own door. When I checked, the hall was empty, silent, but I always felt the weight of eyes watching through the peephole. One weekend I forced myself to confront him. I waited until I heard him in the hall, then stepped out with a smile. I asked politely if everything was all right, if he was settling in. Well, he nodded, said very little. just that everything was fine, his voice flat and low. I hesitated, then mentioned the girl I thought I had seen. His face tightened ever so slightly. Before he replied, "What girl? I do not have a daughter." His eyes held mine for a long moment, unblinking, until I muttered an apology and retreated inside. From then on, I began to notice her more often. Not in daylight. Never when others were around, only in the late hours when the hall was empty or the street outside was quiet. She would appear in fleeting glimpses standing on the balcony, her small figure silhouetted against the night. Sometimes she lifted a hand in a slow, wavering wave, always smiling faintly, always silent. When I blinked or looked away, she was gone, leaving only the still curtain swaying in her place. The caretaker insisted again and again that the man lived alone, yet the signs were undeniable. Once, while walking up the stairwell, I heard laughter, soft and quick like a child playing hide and seek. It came from the direction of his apartment. But when I reached the landing, the hall was empty, the door tightly shut. Another time I found a small toy left outside my own door. A wooden horse worn and faded with paint. I had never seen it before, and no children in the building claimed it. I began losing sleep, haunted by the contradiction, the presence of someone who should not exist. Every sound in the hallway sent my heart racing. Every flicker of light made me expect to see her standing there staring, her smile pressed against the glass. One night I dared to leave my door ajar just enough to peek, and at exactly midnight I saw her again, standing in front of his door, not moving, not knocking, just standing still with her face turned toward me, her smile stretching too wide to be natural. I slammed the door shut and locked it, breathless. From then on, I avoided leaving my apartment after dark, yet the sense of being watched never left. I kept the curtains drawn, kept lights on, but the feeling of her presence seeped through walls, through silence. One evening, as I sat trying to distract myself with television, I felt the hairs on my arms rise slowly. I turned toward the balcony door, and there she was on the other side of the glass, pale face pressed close, eyes wide, unblinking, lips curved in that same faint smile. I leapt up, heart hammering. But before I could move, she was gone, the night beyond empty, as if she had never been there. I no longer trusted what was real and what was not. Perhaps stress had broken my mind. Perhaps the caretaker was right, and the man lived alone. Perhaps my imagination had filled the empty halls with ghosts of children, but the toy remained real. The humming remained real, and the look in his eyes when I mentioned her remained real. To this day, I still live in that building, though I keep my distance from the man across the hall. He greets me politely from time to time, his smile bland and meaningless. But whenever I pass his door, I feel it, the cold weight of something waiting inside. I never mention the girl anymore, never ask questions, but in the corner of my eye, I still see her from time to time, waving silently, always at night, always smiling, and no matter how many times I blink, she is always gone before I can look directly at her. It was close to midnight on a Thursday when the landline phone in my small apartment rang. The sound startled me because nobody ever called that late. I lived alone and had few friends who would bother to dial at such an hour. I picked up thinking maybe it was an emergency. But what I heard on the other end was not a voice, just a slow, heavy breathing. The kind of sound that makes the hair on the back of your neck rise. I said hello more than once, my voice trembling with unease, but there was no answer. Only the rhythmic sound of someone inhaling and exhaling, as if standing close enough for me to feel it through the receiver. I slammed the phone down, trying to laugh it off, telling myself it was some prank. Barely a minute later, it rang again. I froze, staring at it, my pulse racing. Finally, I picked it up again, and this time the breathing was faster, more ragged, and then a whisper so faint I could barely understand, but the words cut through me like ice. The whisper said, "You are not alone." I felt my knees weaken. I demanded, "Who is this?" but the line went dead. Silence. Nothing but the pounding of my own heart. I barely slept that night. Tossing in bed, every sound of the building, creaks of the pipes, footsteps in the hall, made me flinch. I convinced myself it was just some sick joke, maybe a wrong number, but deep down I knew it was not random. The words felt intentional, like whoever was on the other end knew me, knew where I was. The following evening I tried to distract myself with television, but right at midnight the phone rang again. The same deep, heavy breathing. This time I stayed quiet, not giving any reaction. hoping the caller would get bored. But after a few seconds, the whisper came again. Not the same words, though this time it said, "I see you." My chest tightened as I scanned the room. The blinds were closed, the lights dim, but I could not shake the feeling that eyes were on me somewhere close. I rushed to the window, pulled the curtains aside. The street outside was empty except for a single flickering lamppost. I whispered into the phone, "What do you want?" And just like before, the line clicked off. By the third night, the ringing had become predictable. Always the same time. Always the same pattern. I tried unplugging the phone, thinking that would end it, but somehow it still rang the moment the clock struck 12, the cord hanging loose and useless. I remember backing away from the table as the sound filled the room. Impossible, unnatural. I picked up, hands shaking, and the voice this time was clearer, stronger. It said, "Stop locking your door." I could not breathe after that. I spent hours sitting against the door with a kitchen knife in my lap, waiting for the handle to turn, but it never did. When morning came, I felt foolish, exhausted, but too afraid to tell anyone who would believe me that a disconnected phone was ringing with threats and whispers. The next nights blurred together in a haze of fear. The calls continued. Sometimes the breathing was faster, sometimes slower, sometimes words, sometimes only silence, but always at midnight. I began dreading the clock. I would watch the minutes tick closer, feeling trapped in a ritual I could not escape. I thought about throwing the phone away, but part of me was terrified that if I did, it would find another way to reach me. Maybe through my mobile, maybe through the walls themselves. One night I tried recording the call. I placed a recorder next to the receiver, hit play, and waited. Sure enough, at midnight the ringing started. I answered, the breathing filled the line, and the voice said, "I am inside." I dropped the phone, rushing to check the apartment, every corner, every closet, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. But there was nothing. No one. I replayed the recording, hoping to capture proof, but all I heard was static. No breathing. No voice, just the faint sound of my own panicked words echoing back at me. Sleep deprivation took hold of me. I began seeing things, shadows moving at the edge of vision, shapes standing in doorways. When I blinked away the blur, I stopped eating properly, stopped going out at night. My world shrank to the phone and the clock and the endless dread of the midnight call. Then came the night that changed everything. I decided not to answer. I let the phone ring until the sound felt like it was drilling into my skull. It stopped after what felt like an eternity, and I sighed with relief. But then my mobile lit up, vibrating on the table, and the number flashing across the screen was my own landline number, shaking. I answered, and the voice was sharper than ever. It said, "I told you not to ignore me." The days after that became unbearable. I could not trust my senses. I thought I heard the phone when it was not ringing. I thought I heard breathing in the silence of the apartment. I started leaving the TV on all night to drown out the sounds. But even then, I would wake up at midnight as if something was pulling me from sleep, waiting for me to hear. Finally, I confided in a coworker, told him half of the story. He laughed, nervously told me to get rid of the phone. I did, smashed it into pieces, threw it away in the dumpster outside that night. I felt a small sense of victory, thinking it was over. But at exactly midnight, the intercom buzzer rang, the one connected to the front door of the building. I froze, staring at it, my hands trembling. It buzzed again and again, relentless. I finally picked it up, pressing the button to ask, "Who is there?" But all I heard was the same slow, heavy breathing. I dropped the receiver and backed away from the wall, heart slamming in my chest. The buzzer stopped. Silence filled the apartment. But I knew deep down it would never really stop. It had moved beyond the phone, beyond the wires. It had found me. And once it finds you, there is no way to make it go away. Now every night as the clock nears midnight, I sit in the dark, listening, waiting. Sometimes it is the intercom. Sometimes it is the faint ring of a phone that no longer exists. Sometimes it is the vibration of my mobile showing no caller ID. But always, there is the sound of breathing and the promise of words that cut into my bones, reminding me that I am not alone, reminding me that the voice is closer than I ever want to believe. It was supposed to be nothing more than a short stop. Sarah had been driving for hours, cutting across rural Pennsylvania, the roads narrowing into two-lane stretches, hemmed in by endless woods. The sun had slipped behind the horizon hours ago, and the only light now was the pale reflection of her headlights bouncing off the faded road signs. She hadn't meant to end up here. Her GPS had rerouted her when she missed an exit, and after another 30 miles of empty farmland, she realized she was exhausted. That was when she saw the sign, Green Hollow Motel, vacancy. The place looked like something out of a forgotten decade. A row of 6 doors, each painted the same dull green, sagging under the weight of peeling paint. A single flickering neon sign buzzed above the office window. A soda machine stood beside the door, dead and gutted. The parking lot was cracked asphalt, weeds pushing up through the lines. Sarah pulled in reluctantly. She told herself she just needed sleep. One night, then she'd be gone at first light. The man inside the office was old, much older than she expected. He sat hunched behind a counter, a yellowing newspaper spread open in front of him. His skin was weathered, the kind of leathered texture you only see on someone who'd spent decades in the sun. His eyes, though, were alert, sharp in a way that made her uncomfortable the second they met hers. "Traveling through?" he asked, his voice low, gravelly. "Yeah, just passing," Sarah said quickly. He slid a key across the counter without asking for ID, without even glancing at the logbook that lay to his side. "Room 6, he said, his lips curling almost into a smirk. Sarah forced a polite smile, took the key, and left. The room smelled faintly of mildew and cigarettes. The wallpaper was faded, curling in the corners, and the carpet was sticky in places. The bedspread was a floral pattern from some bygone era, but at least it looked clean. She locked the door, dropped her bag on the chair, and collapsed on the bed. Her phone had 1 bar of service. She texted her sister. Made it to a motel, safe. Talk tomorrow, but wasn't sure if it even sent. Sleep came quickly, but so did the noise. Sometime after midnight, Sarah woke with a start. At first, she thought it was part of a dream, but then she heard it again, a soft shuffle outside her door. She held her breath. The sound paused, then came again. Slow, deliberate footsteps. Sarah sat up, heart pounding. The thin curtains glowed faintly from the parking lot light. A shadow shifted across them. Someone was out there. She told herself it was just another guest, maybe returning late. But the footsteps stopped directly outside her room. She stared at the door, at the flimsy brass handle, the chipped wood. Whoever it was stood there for what felt like a full minute. Then, a gentle jiggle of the handle. Sarah's throat went dry. The door was locked, she was sure of it, but the thought of someone testing it made her chest tighten. After a long silence, the footsteps moved away. She didn't sleep again that night. In the morning, sunlight made the motel look less sinister, but no less depressing. Sarah went to the office to check out, only to find the old man waiting, seated in the exact same position as before. "Sleep all right?" he asked, his tone almost mocking. Sarah hesitated. "Yeah, fine." His eyes lingered on her. He didn't blink much. She felt herself shrinking under the weight of his stare. "You heading far?" he asked. "Just back on the road." He nodded slowly, as though he knew more than she was saying. When Sarah slid the key across the counter, his hand brushed hers. His skin was rough, cold. She pulled away too quickly, and his smile widened. She told herself she was being paranoid. Maybe it had been nothing. Another guest, some drunk stumbling into the wrong room. Still, as she drove away, her chest remained tight. She promised herself she would never stop at places like that again. But fate had other plans. Hours later, heavy rain forced her off the highway. She was low on gas, and when she pulled into a rest stop, the pumps were out of order. The only nearby option that showed on her GPS was a familiar name, Green Hollow Motel. Sarah's stomach dropped. By the time she reached it, the rain was pouring so hard she could barely see. Every part of her screamed to keep driving, but the storm was relentless. Against her better judgment, she parked under the buzzing neon sign once again. The old man was there, waiting. Same seat, same newspaper, same sharp eyes. "Well," he said softly. "Back again." Sarah froze. She hadn't told him she'd stayed before, hadn't even given her name. "Room 6, he said, pushing the key toward her once more. Her hand shook as she took it. That night the noises came earlier. Sarah sat on the bed, rain hammering the window, when she heard the shuffle of feet outside. She froze, eyes fixed on the door. The footsteps stopped directly outside her room again. Then came the scraping sound, metal against metal. Someone was trying a key. Her stomach twisted. The old man. She crept to the door, holding her breath, watching the knob. It jiggled once, then again, harder this time. "Hello?" she whispered, her voice shaking. The sound stopped. Silence. Then slow footsteps moving away. She backed into the corner, clutching her phone. No service. She typed out a message anyway, her hands trembling. "If something happens, I'm at Green Hollow Motel, room 6. She prayed it would send when she had signal again. For the next 2 hours, she sat awake, listening. Every creak, every drip of water from the ceiling felt amplified. At 3 a.m., exhaustion took her. She must have dozed, because the next thing she knew, the handle turned sharply. Someone was in the room. She bolted upright, but the door hadn't opened. It was locked. She stared, breath ragged, certain she'd seen it twist. On the floor by the door, a shadow stretched under the crack. Someone was standing there, waiting. She didn't move until dawn. When light finally filled the room, Sarah gathered her things and opened the door slowly. The hallway was empty, the parking lot wet from rain. On the doormat outside her room lay a single item, a spare motel key, its tag marked 6. Her stomach dropped. She went to the office, but the door was locked, the blinds drawn. The old man was gone. No sign of him. Sarah didn't wait. She threw her bag in the car and drove until the motel was a shrinking speck in her rearview mirror. To this day, she doesn't know who stood outside her door that night. Maybe it was another guest, maybe someone else entirely. But deep down, Sarah believes it was the old man, because when she replayed the moment in her head, the sound of the key scraping, the way the handle had turned, she remembered something chilling. The man had never asked her name, never took her information, never wrote anything in the logbook. Yet somehow he always knew exactly who she was, and somehow he always gave her the same key. Room number 6.